Maybe now. There we go. It's official. My microphone is on its way out. I think it's working. It is. It's definitely this. Here, I'll show you guys. I'll show you guys the part right there. That little guy. That's the culprit. This does happen. I've noticed it's been happening more and more and more where it's like I look at the screen and it's like it looks like it's working. Looks like it's going, and then I'm like, "What?" And then I look at the mic and it's not blinking, so I know that it's working, and I'm like, "Hmm, it says it's on." And then you know how it's kind of like that it's funny because I use this phrase a lot, kind of like that place on your phone, when you can't charge it and the wire gets loose and you're like, "Oh, what the hell?" And it's constantly coming out. So, if that happens again during the course of today's program, we're gonna rely on you guys to let us know. Start shouting in the chat. Use a bunch of cuss words. You know what I mean? Some use say something crazy. Anyway, greetings everyone. Thank you, Queen Victor. The sound is good. It's yeah, it is. It seems like all of our multimedia technology has a short lifespan now, right? What they call it planned obsolescence. Pretty sure that's what it is. Anyway, it can't be because I just threw it in a box when we moved from Florida. There's no way that it's just because I coiled up the cord really hard and sort of bent it and tossed it in a box right as we were leaving Florida and then drove across like 4 states with it rattling around in the back of a trailer. That has nothing to do with it. So I don't, what I mean? I don't want to hear that from any of you guys. I'll pull this thing over. I will pull this thing over and anyway. Yep. Y'all know how it is. Anyway, let's get to the matter at hand. Thank you for coming back. This is episode 2. We're going through a live book reading over the next few weeks, maybe a few months. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. But we're going through the journey of essentially here it is once again. If you made it, if you're watching this broadcast after the what was it 2 minutes of silence as we get our technology worked out, if you made it past the 2 minutes of silence without clicking off, let's just say that was a little bit of an initiation. If you're still listening, it's like congratulations, you passed the test. But anyway, all that said, we're going to continue our journey through Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? Released on June 22nd of 2024, a little bit over 1 year ago. And in our first episode, in our initial, what was it like the pilot? In our pilot episode, we were taking a little bit of a journey through the first couple chapters, and it's funny because those are kind of the most like emotionally charged and sort of like cathartic in a certain sense because it's me going over like the real origin point of kind of what happened and how this started and the weirdness of it. And it was also probably the hardest part of the book to write because there's so much that I could not put in there. There's so much that I probably should have put in there. You know what I mean? And I think it's one of those things where you look back on it and you realize that there's really no adequate way to really convey the full, what they might call, weight or just the full energy of, that story and that time in my life. And so, that's why we're doing this, so we can go into it. I encourage any and all questions. Those are very, very helpful. This time, I promise I'm going to go back and look at them. So it'll be helpful if you put in all caps question. That's a really, really helpful one because it just helps me stay on track. You can share this video if you enjoy it. You can also pick up a copy of this book. You can see the link on the screen there. You can get it via Amazon. I want to thank those of you guys who did actually come through since our last broadcast. And several people actually, I noticed. So thank you for that. But yeah, before we get started, let me know if anybody has any questions. We're not going to make it painfully long like the majority of our other appearances. So, and also the good news is I noticed there's no portrait mode this time. That's a new feature for StreamYard, I think. Sorry, you can tell it's going to be a good one. I'm already like kind of foaming at the mouth in an embarrassing manner. So, anyway, you can tell it's going to be a good one when we're already there. But anyway, let me know if you guys have any questions before we get started. I'll let you know what page we're starting on in just a moment for any of you guys that want to follow along. But the first chapter we're going to get through today, actually, the second chapter, it really is kind of the origin point, like I stated. And then we get into kind of where we went after that. And honestly, we get pretty weird later on. I don't know how those parts are going to come through. There's a few people that have I've spoken to about it, and they're like, "Wow, yeah, that'll be fun when we get to that part." Because there was, I'll just say it, there was a lot of really weird and bizarre shit that I had to go through on the path of kind of getting to the stage that we're at now. And I'm not trying to say that the stage we're at now is from some highly elevated position, but one thing it does show you is, an ability to look back on the journey that you've taken and notice, where did we go wrong? Where did we go right? What did we learn? What can we take from this bizarre set of experiences and bring forward so that those in the collective who are going through their own transformation process, or what some people might call a walk-in experience, which is such a loaded spiritual term, is it not? Is it not? That's one. As soon as you start throwing around the walk-in term, because everyone has their own idea of how that process goes, and there's really no one finite authority that says here's how we define these spiritual experiences. I think that's one of the beauties or the beautiful things of our current time on earth. But anyway, let us begin. I don't see any questions here. Okay, so, and we're going to be jumping into this totally cold. Not I have not looked at this until just before we went live. So I want to let you guys know where we are at for anyone that's following along at home. We are on page 23. I guess it's a testament to my eyesight improving because I no longer need glasses, or I can really no longer use glasses to read. It has to be like boom, like right in my face. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's an awkward thing. But we are on page 23, I believe. And just for a real quick recap, where were we in as they say, last week's exciting episode? We had just gone through what was ultimately I would call an explosive Kundalini activation, and ultimately this crown chakra opening that began for me in 2015, that literally just ripped open my energy body. And so we're at the stage of the journey where we're just going through some of the bizarre synchronicities and the weirdness of that time in my life. And once again, for those of you guys that are tuning into this, that have never heard this before, you just stumbled across this channel. It's really because I think there's a piece of you within here. And especially those that seem to accidentally come onto this broadcast, it's largely because there is a factor in your life or some force, if you want to call it spirit, that is bringing you toward the awareness that you have a certain set of abilities. And we're living in a time in which you can develop them on an entirely new level than I think what many of us have been trained to believe. And this is just my story of how that process kind of began. And I guess we're still doing it 8 years later. So maybe we did something right. But anyway, we're going to continue from page 23. And I'm actually going to go back a paragraph. So right now we're talking about a man named Dale that I was prompted to just communicate with randomly in the midst of this weird awakening journey. It sounds kind of trite and meaningless describing it in this setting, but ultimately it was because he was going to die the very next day. And it was one of those moments in my journey where it showed me the level to which spirit or some outside force, something greater than me, was now interacting with me in some way, shape, or form. And so we're going to begin from the second paragraph on page 23. A short time later, after collecting myself, I walked up to the front office to ask about Dale. It turned out it was estimated he had died sometime between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m. the previous day, lying down on the couch after getting home from work. One of his roommates had found him as they came home from work that evening. I had talked to him at just after 1 p.m. I knew because it was my lunch break, the same time every day. I couldn't believe that he had gone home and died that very day, only a couple hours later. He was part of a tight crew of older guys there, and I had heard later on he had late stage hepatitis C and COPD. I had been deeply affected by this man that I had never knew, and I didn't know why. I wish I could say I had time to carefully analyze and process this, but it was just the beginning. Remember all those medications I had suddenly stopped taking, which I'm going to pause here and mention that's a huge part of my story. And I know it's a huge part of the story for a lot of other people within, if you want to call it, like a star seed or spiritual or whatever really ridiculous buzzword kind of title that you want to add to it, just a certain subsect of people that become attracted to this type of information, whether for good or bad or even broken reasons. For a lot of us, that's part of the journey. And, we go through many traumas in this life. And, for me, I think that was the primary sort of vibration or wavelength within my life that needed to shift first in order for this experience to continue to take shape or to continue to integrate. And so at that time in my life, like I had mentioned, for those of you guys that didn't watch last week, I think I was on about 5 to 7 different medications at that time, mood stabilizers, a bunch of things. Most importantly, the real kind of what I would call damaging, or the real the most active ingredient of all those was definitely Suboxone, also known as buprenorphine, used as an opiate blocker, and somewhat of it's almost become like a treatment modality in and of itself, which is not to say that it is. It's just, it's one of those drugs that they throw at people that have addictions, and it just kind of overtakes that in your life. That becomes your thing. And so I had been kind of knee deep in that experience with that for about 8.5 years at that point. And so I wish I could say I had the time to carefully analyze this. This is me getting back to this is me getting back to the story. I wish I could say I had time to carefully analyze and process this, but it was just the beginning. Remember all those medications I had suddenly stopped taking? Well, they hadn't forgotten me either, and by the end of that week, I was getting very, very sick. I'll pause there again to mention I was a person that had a very delayed withdrawal reaction. It was shockingly delayed. It was like, as a person who had had long-term addictions at other stages of my life, I was very, very, very painfully aware of the phenomenon of any form of opiate or pharmaceutical withdrawal. And for those that are familiar with it, it's unavoidable and it comes very quickly. And it was weird because somehow at that stage of my life, I did not experience that for days, maybe even a part of me wants to say almost 2 weeks, but they hadn't forgotten me either. Getting back to the story, and by the end of that week, I was getting very, very sick. So it did catch up with me. It's odd given the potency of the Suboxone and other medications that I was taking that I had such a delayed reaction to it. Most people would have felt its absence within 12 to 24 hours, but for some strange reason, it was like my body suppressed every symptom for the first few days, and then at the end of the week, it hit me like a brick wall. The next 2 weeks were a complete blur of dissociation, illness, madness, agony, for real, and what I now know to be involuntary out-of-body travel, a very, very real thing that can and does happen. Not enough people talk about it. The sudden chemical change in my body after what had been 8 straight years of daily dosing a host of mood stabilizers, stimulants, synthetic opiate blockers had caused every single old wound in my body to reignite itself. I drifted in and out of intense crying spells, uncontrollable fits of anger, and pouring waves of sweat. Those of you guys that have been through it will be somewhat familiar with what I'm talking about, that would wash over me at seemingly random intervals. To make it even worse, if I stared at something too long, whether it was a spot on the wall or even someone's eyes, I would find myself being somehow pulled out of my body into whatever it was I was fixated on. It was frightening and fascinating at the same time, but I had no ability to speak about it. Who would I tell anyway? I mean, this is me pausing from the text. Really, I was not equipped at that stage of my journey didn't have any sort of social support. I had a marriage that was not really supportive of such experiences, and really no real true friends to speak of. There was really nowhere that I could, there's nowhere that I could deprogram that other than through what we would have called, like modern psychiatry or, regular therapy, which, having been employed in that, very arena myself, I knew like that's the worst thing you can do. Not all the time, but in this case. Anyway, let's get back to it. About 2 or 3 weeks or so after that initial experience with that older woman at the homeless fair, I had come to the stage in which I was so sick and insane, all I wanted to do was go back on all my old medication, to somehow return to normal, to go back to sleep in a sense. Truth be told, I didn't actually want that, but I felt so sick it was the only thing I knew how to do. When I went looking for the large stash of meds I had hoarded over the years, like a lot of us, right? You know what I mean? It's a very, very normal thing. When I went back to look for the large stash of meds I had hoarded over the years, it had turned out that my wife had actually taken it all and thrown it out without even knowing, during a time when she had been manically cleaning out old junk we had stored in various places around the house. It threw me into a rage of despair and such extreme soul sickness that I just sat in the backyard in the blazing hot Southern California sun and cried like a child while at the time, wanting to kill myself and flee from everyone and everything around me. And I just kind of a prohibited word on, YouTube now, but there were brief moments, I would say, at that stage in which, it wasn't even so much that one wanted to, we could say, unalive themselves, so to speak. It was one of those universal kind of like cries for help and acts of despair in which one has no other, like idea other than just make it stop. And I think a lot of people have been through similar moments like that, where it's like, it's not even really what you want to do. You are just unequipped with any form of coping mechanism that can help you understand or ground or root yourself in some form of normalcy when your entire world has been ripped open. And getting back to the text here, it was truly one of the lowest moments of my entire life. I couldn't go back, and at the same time, I couldn't go forward. But forward into what? What was happening to me? Who was I? As wild as it sounds now, I never actually had any idea I was experiencing a psychic activation, awakening, or anything other than a freak occurrence of my own madness. I had never equated my previous interests and the path I had gone down during school the years prior as anything other than just me and my own brand of weird obsession. There was nothing inside me equipped to help me understand that this was something real. On that day in particular, I was sitting cross legged in the sun at the side of my backyard next to the fence. The tears had dried, and I was just sitting there listening to something that felt like applause and laughter inside my head. When I would focus on it, the tears would start to run again, and I felt like someone was actually cheering for me. But how could that be possible? At that moment, I once again had an urge to look up into the sky. Like I said earlier, this was not something I had been historically able to do. Seriously, though, sounds crazy. I literally could not. One of the meds I was on was actually known to cause extreme light sensitivity, and looking into the brightness of the daylight sky hurt me in such a strange way that it caused me to never do it, actually. That's why I was so shocked on that very first day, because it was like my eyes had been opened in a new way, as cheesy as it may sound. At that moment, when I looked up into the sky, I saw something that still doesn't make sense to this day. Hundreds of feet up in the air, just to my left, was the face of a lion. Not a cloud shaped like a lion. It's important to mention, by the way, to clarify. Not a cloud shaped like a lion, an actual lion. It seemed to be the size of a blimp and was kind of transparent. I could see through it, but it was also unmistakably there. Not a cartoon looking lion either. It was like an actual gigantic transparent lion's head just showed up and seemed to be looking down at me. For some reason, it brought me peace, and as silly as it sounds, I felt like it was watching me. I never told anyone about it until a month or so later when I finally cracked and began to pour this all out to my mom. which I did, like a lot of us. You know, thank God at that stage, despite all of her issues, she was able to receive me and my madness with grace and love. We didn't always have the best relationship, which is a whole other subject altogether, but during that stage of my life, she became one of the only people who I felt safe enough to tell all this wildness to, and I will never forget it. She never judged it. She didn't tell me I was crazy. She never rejected anything. Without her, I might have gone back on meds, checked into a hospital, or even, as I can't, I'll try not to say the word, unalived myself. Who knows? I have to say that that was kind of a saving grace for me. I think I was historically not one of those people that would kind of, often run back to the safety of my family in a certain time. It was just not like a behavior that was native to me at that time in my life. And I remember, like, just like I was saying earlier, there was no one that I could talk to about it. I mean, really, there was no one. And for some reason, I think that spirit really had moved my mom at that stage of her life to really just be like, okay, I'll listen to this. And it was, I think I mean, I know it really changed the game for me. I think it allowed me to continue to experience something without a form of shame. And even if I knew that no one could understand it, it was like, at least there was a place to dump it out. And so, I'll also mention that, the thing about the lion, that's another thing that it has been a form that has returned to me at many different intervals, in sort of inner work and spiritual work and what we might call shamanic work and, just internal work over the years. And I could honestly say I think that day was the first time, just whatever that presence, whether it be a symbol that my subconscious was creating, or whether it be a being, or a reflection, or who, who cares what it was. It's interesting to note that it showed itself at many other intervals since, but that was the first time, and it's a very strange thing to kind of be existing within what we would call the world of traditional kind of, therapy and, Western psychology and all of the ins and outs of that. And to begin to have such dissociative, anomalous experiences. And then, to come to a moment like that in which, everything that you think is possible is completely defied. And you look up in the sky and see the face of some animal that should have never been there, that doesn't even fit in with the framework of reality in which you've chosen to accept throughout your life. I mean, I to me, it makes perfect sense. That's literally why I called the book "What If You're Not Crazy? What If You're Psychic?" Because, like I was just saying, at that stage, I still had no idea. I was very aware that something crazy was happening to me, like crazy was happening to me. But at the same time, I was also sitting there going, well, I just went off of all these medications after all these years, and that can cause all kinds of strange experiences and wild stuff. And so, I think I still had a lot of the sort of rationality of that kind of somewhat closed-minded, idea that, these are just projections of the mind, where the reality is 8 years later, I honestly don't care whether it was or it wasn't. The results afterward were so much more real. So anyway, let's get back to it. Um, Continuing from page 26. A day or so later, after the lion appeared, I recall the third time I was able to perceive myself coming through a portal in the ceiling. At this stage, there was already a major rift forming in my marriage, and I had graduated, in a sense, to sleeping on the couch most days of the week. The truth is, though, I barely slept, but for maybe 3 to 4 hours a night due to all the chemicals leaving my body and withdrawal from years and years of meds. That morning in particular, I felt and watched myself drift back down into my body. It was still dark outside. I could hear the buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and I could immediately feel something in the room with me. I looked over to my left and I saw three hooded figures. They were standing in a row just on the other side of the room. The air felt thick, like we were submerged in invisible water. They had robes on, and their faces were covered with big hoods. In truth, it seemed as if there were no faces at all, but it didn't really register in the moment. The one on the left was the smallest, the one in the middle was the tallest, and the one on the right was kind of in the middle in terms of size. There were no words and no communication. All I could do was lay there and look at them and feel my sick body rock back and forth on the couch like a toddler trying to find warmth or comfort. At that very moment, just to my left, only inches away, appeared my late grandmother, Camille Rodriguez. That's her real name, by the way, who had died maybe a year or so earlier, maybe more. My concept of time is very bad. She had died some time previously before that, not too long, not too long, but shortly before that. She seemed younger and was wearing clothes I would have imagined were from the early 1970s. She leaned over, smiled at me, and touched the inside of my leg. At that very second, I seemed to fall asleep, blank out. Who knows? I woke up a short time later with the sun coming through the window, and I noticed one of our cats was still laying with me on the couch. The craziest part about it all was that from that day forward, this is an important thing to mention, and I'll talk more about it in a moment. I'll get to any questions that we have as well. But it's an important thing to mention. As I woke up that morning after that experience, I noticed our cat was just kind of laying there right next to me on the couch. This is me getting back to the text. The craziest part about it all was from that day forward, all of the symptoms of withdrawal, every pain, every twisting, turning, aching, burning sensation I was experiencing during that detox phase had ended. And it never returned either. It took a few hours for it to register. I was awestruck by what I had thought was a dream, but I had been awake the whole time. Something had happened, and from that day forward, I have never experienced any symptom of withdrawal or toxicity from that stage of my life. It's like in that second when my grandma's spirit touched my leg, it ended once and for all. And it's important to mention that that's literally what happened. It was like prior to that evening, I had gone into such a state of advanced, intense withdrawal from so many toxins, so many things leaving the body. It was like I had stains on my clothes. Wherever I would sit on the couch, there would be this stain of sweat and the smell of some kind of chemical leaving my body. It was so far beyond like anything that feels normal or even good that this I didn't have time to sit there and go, am I sick? Am I this? Am I that? Am I having a spiritual experience? Because I was just completely overtaken. After that first week when the sickness started, it just took me down and there was no sense, there was nothing that could be made, from my journey. And having experienced that moment, I now understand, and I've heard many stories of people whose family members have come forth in spirit form and helped them with a form of healing. And that's what I know and what I believe to be true on that moment and on that very day in particular. That sickness, that element of, toxicity left and it never came back. And that's not to say I haven't been ill. That's not to say I haven't had problems. That's not to say, anything else. That's saying what was we were experiencing at that stage of that journey was miraculously cleared from my body. And so, anyway, let's get back to the story. We'll go a little bit more and then we'll pause for any anything else. But um this was the funnest part about it all. To make this all even more bizarre, one of our cats, Dexter, had been lying on the couch with me that night. He was a jet black, murderous, stray tomcat. That sounds like a dumb description, but every one of us, probably a lot of us, have had a cat in your life. A lot of us have had cats, and you know how like one of your cats just will kill everything. He was the cat that we had that was like, man, he will kill everything. He was a very cool cat. I think that he has come back to me in spirit form at a couple different intervals, but he was a jet black, murderous stray tomcat who was born in the backyard and just walked in the house one day and stayed forever. He seemed to live and die many times, as cats often do. In hindsight, he definitely had something like FIV or some other type of feline autoimmune disease. At that period, we had all acknowledged he was close to death. He had become a bag of bones, and we were watching him fade day by day. Miraculously, he seemed to have a shocking, sudden recovery, and in what seemed like days had started to grow new fur. He was eating again, and within a month or two, he seemed to fully recover. He had been lying on the couch with me that night when this strange visitation had occurred, and I knew in my heart he was my confirmation that something had actually happened. Not that I really needed one. I was okay for the first time in so long I couldn't remember. None of it made sense, but it was actually real. He had been healed too, and he was my only living witness. And I will pause there, because that is exactly what it was. It was like we watched this half dead animal kind of come back within days, within weeks, and it was amazing. I had watched him regenerate at other times. You know how you'll see cats go through their, their cycle of 9 lives, especially outside cats. And at that stage, we had a lot of stray animals, within our neighborhood, and our house was kind of a hub for feeding a lot of them. And some of them stayed, some of them left. You know what I mean? Some of them died. And he was one of the ones that stayed, but very, very, very interesting animal. But when I look back at that stage of the journey, I mean, that was direct evidence that something, to me, at least in my mind, however distorted or even, possibly sensical I could have been, um, it just, to me, proved that something had actually taken place. And so, um, I'll pause there for a moment. I'll scan for any questions, and then we're going to keep going. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. You never know how many people are going to show up to these weird experiential lives like this. It's like, yeah, sorry, we have nothing to say about the Galactic Federation currently, but it's all just regular, boring human experiences. But anyway, thank you for your comments. Nothing Defined says it's shocking how casually and pervasively these heavy duty life altering prescription drugs are pushed on unsuspecting dupes. Ain't that the truth, man? I feel you. I was certainly of the generation in which those things were sort of being pushed on a mass level, maybe not for the first time, but it was just standard issue, late 90s, early 2000s, based on what you were going through. Oh, it's all right, try these medications, that's all you have to do. And admittedly, I was one of the people that was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'm really good at taking medication. I've been doing it my whole life. You know what I mean? Cool. Yeah. Now we'll do it for a good reason. You know what I mean? Like the mindset of that was like perfect, And so it's a insidious and destructive loop that many of us get caught up in, you know, very, very, very interesting experience. Robin Lane says, like your mother's higher self was showing up for you both. She really was. And she, it's funny, she's still doing good to this very day. So she's still hanging in there. But yeah, no, she certainly played a role. She played a role in those early stages. White Swan says there's something about opiate withdrawals that is just so intense and psychically activating. Yes, very much. For sure, some of us insert into our blueprints for this for sure, some of us insert into our blueprints for this human experience. I very much agree. I think I know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if you want to call it inserted that blueprint or any other term, it was a condition that I know that I chose to come in here to experience. I'm not saying that's how it is for everyone. For me, it was like, in looking back, it was like, yep, that was one of your, projects in this life. Part of me thinks, I guess I did pretty good because it's no longer a factor, in my world. So I'm like, maybe did that does that mean we did it right? I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, let's keep going. We're going to keep reading. What's up? Renee Nagel says, years ago, I was a clinical psychotherapist at Loyola University Department of Psychiatry. And I was also in private practice, a holistic private practice. My psychiatrist colleagues would say I missed the rest of it. Sorry. Oh, anyway, yeah, I missed your other part of your comment, but yeah, I feel you. I feel you. Thanks for showing up. Brandy Dawn says, at the peak of my illness from meningitis and Lyme, I was on dozens of meds. Congratulations if you're one of the people that gets Lyme in this life. It usually means on some level that you have very distinct empathic abilities and you have an ability to absorb energy on an amazing level. It's both a great ability and a great liability. Just, regardless of how we would describe the origin point of Lyme, it is what a lot of people call a disease that tends to affect empaths um, more than others. But anyway, yeah, thank you. Oh, here it is. Maybe this was the other part of your comment. What are you doing with my patients? They're going off their medications and they're getting better, right? I know, right? Totally. That is exactly how it is. Willow Root says, I was brought to the hospital after having been drugged by someone and they sent me home prescribing me antipsychotics, right? Perfect. Right? Perfect. Yeah, yeah. Don't worry. You'll be okay. Just take this. We'll schedule with you in 3 to 6 months. Take that. You know what I mean? Anyway, anyway, yeah. I hear you. I too got dosed once with some kind of like either like mushrooms or some form of like LSD at a conference years ago. I did not know I was taking it, which is not fun. That is not a fun experience, when someone gives it to you and you did not know. It's like, "Whoa, wait, what?" Which is how it was for me. I was like, "Whoa, what's happening? How" oh, man, it was not fun. I had to have somebody drive me home. Anyway, here we go. Here's a question. Ramy Salem says, Matt, did the beings arrive through the portal? And did they want to go in the portal? I do not know, actually. I did not witness them arrive. And at least in the experience that I'm describing here, there was no communication from them. It was a presence that was just standing there, which I think in some ways, to me, looking back on it now, I think that's one of the things that I think for me brings up a little bit of a fear factor, you know what I mean? But also kind of like a also, well, nothing bad happened, but that's an appearance that has never been explained in my life. And so but no, I wish they would ask me to go through the portal even to this very day. I'm like, "Yeah, let's roll." Anyway, we're gonna get back to the story here. Thanks for hanging out, you guys. Well, we will check in on your comments earlier. So we were just talking about our cat Dexter. Yes, it's true. He accompanied me through a strange form of a healing journey. Gonna get back to the text here. From that point forward, things seemed to accelerate at a shocking pace. I wish I could say it got better, but it really just got weirder and weirder by the day. While I was no longer sick, I was now subjected to feeling the full force of that wind that had now fully spread to inside my bones. It really did feel like wind blowing through my arms, my legs, my chest, yes, genitals as well, everything. And I'll pause there just for a real quick commentary. That's really, really what it felt like. I had very limited understanding of chi or any form of kind of vital life force energy at that stage of my life. And when the journey started, that was the sensation that kept going inside me. It was like something had hollowed out and there was now a wind. And sometimes in my mind, it was almost like wind blowing through a canyon. And it was like, like blowing through my bones and everything. And it was one of those things where if I sat with it and just allowed myself to breathe and feel it, I could feel it in every single part of my entire body. And I'm not saying that in a cool way or like some awesome sensual manner. It was just like, honestly, really, in my mind, I was like, what the fuck? What the fuck? It was just so weird. And so we literally had wind blowing through our body. Let's get back to the text. I tried to smoke weed to dull the intensity, but it only made it 10 times worse. I will say that was a mistake at that time because, when you're in like what we would call like advanced activated kundalini state, and then you add something like that, like weed to it, it's just goes and it goes even crazier. And whew, man, I learned the hard way, but it did. It only made it 10 times worse. What's even crazier is I started to see energies, clouds, and orbs of light hovering around the sides of people's heads. They all seemed to be full of information and images that pertain to each person, or so I imagined they did. Some clouds seemed dirty, and others looked like they came out of an old cartoon. A few people had what looked to be shadow beings trailing behind them like strings dangling off the edge of their heels. I could only see them when I would look slightly away from the person's body. If I was to look at it head on, there wasn't much there, but out of the corner of my eyes, I could focus on it in an indirect way. And honestly, some of them really freaked me out. I'm going to pause there to say that was actually one of the first things that really kind of began to cast fear in my body, and I can say that during this experience for myself, it wasn't really fear wasn't really the overriding kind of emotion. I mean, I would say it was there because I was going through something that I had never gone through before, and it was this bizarre thing, but I was absent from some kind of dread. I was absent from some kind of despair, and it was more a sense of being lost and just being, like, clueless and being, like so I would say fear wasn't the biggest one, but I remember at the stage in which I would begin to see it was very much like a sheet or a film that would kind of trail after people. That was where I would notice there was like a transference of emotion or energy in a way that really disturbed me at first. And what I've come to understand from it later on is that when you're often tuning into what some people would call attachments or layers of energy or even thought forms, or just energies, we'll just say, that attach onto people, one of the ways that you'll often know that you're actually tuning into that energy is not because you'll observe it, like you'll see it and I'll go, oh look, there it is, because you feel it. And if there's emotion attached to it, you're going to feel that emotion, because for a lot of what we would call a fourth density or a lower fourth density, or let's just say a non-physical form of life, whether sentient or not. And most of these, in these cases, I don't think we're really sentient beings, although I'm about to describe one. They're more like fragments or parasites or recordings that would play within people's energy fields. Some of them will bring up an emotion or a feeling or a sensation within the body, sometimes a smell, which we will get to in a moment. But some of them really did freak me out, and like I said a million times, I was not some romantic heroic version of some awakened starseed, like, out there telling the world. I was cowering in a corner in my backyard going, for real. You know what I mean? I got to be authentic about it. And so let's get back to the text. The shadows felt cold and automatic, like computer programs or machines running in this repetitive cycle. Some people had lights and orbs that seemed to circle around them, and one day I even saw a man that seemed to have another person sticking out of the side of his body. If anyone out there can remember the movie Total Recall, it would seem kind of like the character Quado, who was a conjoined parasitic twin embedded into the abdomen of a fully grown man. I'll pause there and say that's probably the closest thing that, like, if you want to grab onto an image of things that I'm talking about here, that is probably one of the best ones for you to grab onto, because it was as if this being was sort of kind of emanating out of the side of although it was more around his back. So the face or the way that it would emit itself was kind of around, I would say, the right side of the back, not the front, because I did not perceive this energy until this person had walked past me. And so let me get to the text and I'll kind of break down a little bit more of this. But so it was very much like for those of you guys who remember Total Recall, it was like Quado. It was like there was a parasitic twin of some kind of weird energy emanating out of the abdomen of a fully grown man. I was actually walking through a Mexican grocery store near my house. I'll tell you exactly where, straight up. This is a real place. It's in National City, California, in San Diego County, and it's a store called Northgate. It might even be on, no, it's not on National Avenue, but anyway, whatever. It's a real store. I was walking through the Northgate Market, literally, Mexican grocery store near my house, and this strange being attached to him seemed to notice me first. The sickest part about it was not his appearance. In fact, it was like a transparent imprint of a withered old man, and obviously not even physical. I could tell that much. It was when it looked at me that this sickeningly strong smell of human feces seemed to overtake my senses. And honestly, straight up, I wanted to run. It was one of those moments, and I think everyone's had this in some form where like a type of energy, or in this case, it was the smell. It was like its energy came forth as a smell, and it was more than what we would call feces. It was like human waste mixed with just like all sorts of just like toxic putrescence. One of those smells, and I know everyone out there has had a moment in your life where you get this scent and you're all, "Oh, whoa, whoa," it, like, shocks you and you're like, "Wow," and you can't stop yourself from reacting to it because it's like, boom. Like, if you've ever here's an example, if you've ever smelled smelling salts, which are very not present now, they're kind of a thing of the past, but smelling salts, when you inhale them, it causes you to like, oh, it's like this shock goes through your system. I felt that. And it was like in this split second, it was like one of those moments where I wanted to like, like instantly get away from this guy. I would say of the early stage experiences during this Kundalini awakening thing, that was probably the week or the day where it was like it was honestly it was very scary. I'll just be real. It was scary. I mean, it didn't overtake me within that, but it was like, who do you possibly tell? At that stage of my life, I could not have imagined writing a book about it. It was like, I can't tell anyone. What are you talking about? You know what I mean? Nobody would have believed me. And so anyway, this sickeningly strong smell of human feces seemed to overtake my senses, and I wanted to run. It's crazy to think that up until now, I have never mentioned this to anyone ever. I didn't. Before writing this book, it was an experience that I had just filed away. And I was like, damn, that was crazy. Anyway, and just went on with my life and just kept going until I started to unpack and like go through what we were going to discuss in this. And I was like, when I was writing the book, and I was like, oh my God. So that, there's so much more. Oh, geez. There's so many more. Anyway, let's get back to it. This sort of thing just seemed to go on, and it kind of culminated with one day in particular, which this was a very difficult day for me. I cannot lie. It was kind of like a crescendo to the madness that I was going through, and not through the sheer bizarreness of it, just because it was like I didn't know who or what I was anymore. Really, ultimately, I couldn't say what was happening to me. There was no language with which to describe the process, and so one day in particular, in which I left sick from work, ended up walking around this tourist site in San Diego known as Seaport Village. It's a real place, really there. You guys can check it out. It is just a weird tourist little trap somewhere in San Diego. We used to go there when I was a kid, and I had made a number of really positive memories with my own son there later on. It seemed like a safe place to be, and as I walked through the parking lot, I saw a group of huge pelicans, seagulls, and other birds of various types having a sounds so crazy. They were having a feeding frenzy over an open dumpster. On top of the dumpster was a very large brown pelican-type bird that seemed very saggy and worn out. I took one look at him and received a very odd image in my mind's eye that felt like a photo and a movie at the same time. I saw a brown skinned man sitting on a white wall with his hands extended out in front of his body, palms down. He had a stack of papers next to him. I somehow knew I needed to walk down the sidewalk and find this man, which seems ridiculous even now. And so I'll say it. It's literally what it says here. Yes, the bird told me. Okay, and I never thought I would ever say such a thing, but it's literally what happened. I felt confused and just kept on walking. There's no way that could be real, right? And so I'll pause there, and I'll give you kind of a mental image. When I used to go to this place, I would always park in the back because there was parking, right? You can park around the back where all these dumpsters are. So I just knew because I had been there a million times. I'm like, I'll just park in the back. I'm just gonna walk around for a while, you know what I mean? It was one of those places where, when you're ever going through something and you might, quote unquote, take a walk in the park. It was kind of like that. It was like a place where I knew I could like walk around during the day and it wouldn't be too chaotic and I could just stare at something and be like, in my own world, and it wouldn't be a problem. And so that was where I went. And as I pull into this little mini parking lot around the backside of this sort of tourist trap area, I mean, it was literally just like that. It was like some nasty ass busted open dumpster, and there was all these birds like going crazy over it. And on one side of the dumpster, the flap was open, and everyone was feeding on one side of it, and on the other side of the dumpster, that big flap was closed, and there was a couple birds just sitting on it, and one of them was huge, and that was the one, and I just looked at that bird, and I was like, "Whoa." You know how you just look at an animal and you're like, "Damn, he's kinda rough," he just looks tore up, like they're missing feathers, and you're just like, and it was just like an instant image, and I could see this wall, and I could, all of these things. And so, that's a fun one to try to talk about, like what years and years later now, because it's like there's a certain breed of people in the world that will say, "So, let me get this straight. You expect me to believe that you were going through a strange episode in which you didn't know what was real anymore. And in the midst of that, you bumped into a bird, and the bird told you to go walk down the street. And so, what did you do? You walked down the street." I did I did what it showed me. And so getting back to the text, there's no way that could be real, right? Oh, I see the comment there. What kind of bird was it? It wasn't like a full pelican. It was just this brown kind of looking one of those bigger birds that hangs out like right near the ocean. They're not the seagulls. They're like these other ones, and it not like a full pelican, just one of those weird like seabirds that you see out there. They, you know what I mean? Anyway, um, about 10 minutes later, I was walking down the sidewalk next to a thick white waist level wall that lined the edge of the water. Sure enough, there was an Indian man standing there. I'll say it was probably about like 200 or so feet. I don't know. No, no. Let's get real. A little bit less than a quarter of a mile away from there. Yeah. There's a significant walk, and you sort of walk down this long walkway, and there's like a white thick wall that lines the white side. And I was just walking down that walkway right next to the ocean, and sure enough, there was an Indian man standing there. One of those nearly homeless looking guys who balances rocks end on end in this seemingly impossible way, with a little coin basket in front of him for donations. He had several rocks stacked up almost to his chest, and sure enough, there was also a stack of red and green flyers next to him on the wall underneath another rock. I walked over and picked up one of the papers. It said something like Reiki and Master Energy Healer Devendra, and I don't know what his last name was, so I just, something or other. I'm pretty sure his first name was Devendra. I got that far. You know what I mean? But it said Reiki, Master Energy Healer. I honestly have no idea what his actual name was, but I took one of the papers and walked away. I felt embarrassed at how he looked at me, as if he looked through me with some kind of deep pity. I was shaken. Did that weird crusty bird actually communicate with me? By that time, so many bizarre things had already taken place, I was starting to just roll with it. I'm not saying it was any easier. I guess I had started to surrender and realize that somehow maybe this guy could help. That evening, I called him and had a painfully awkward conversation in which I stuttered through a very short description of what I had been through, and he agreed to come to my house that Sunday to perform a healing on me. It was one of the first times I had ever sought out this type of healing, and I did not know what to expect. I actually kicked my wife and son out of the house that whole day, and they begrudgingly ended up going out to the car just as he pulled up and got out of this late 1990s beaten down Toyota Camry. He was wearing this wildly ornate deep orange robe with white lines painted horizontally across his forehead or something like that, which is really interesting to kind of have that experience. Here I am sitting in, kind of normal sort of neighborhood world, Sunday afternoon, or it might have actually even been Saturday. And this guy pulls up and hops out of the car, and it's just like, whoa, who invited the strange Eastern wizard? Because it was like, man, I still marvel at those within a spiritual community that are dedicated to upholding the image and choose to wear that type of adornment, because it was just, it was like, damn, okay, who's this guy? And honestly, his healing process was very interesting. It did have an effect, and so we will get back to it here. His healing process involved me just laying down, as he did what I understood afterward to be a form of holy fire Reiki. I immediately left my body and have no recollection of his healing process. It was like I just checked out. And when I came back, he was finished and talking to me in broken English. Your energy, it's way out here, he said. And he was doing it like this. He was like, your energy, it's way out here. And he was like holding his hands out and like making this gesture like it was, too far outside of my body, so to speak. As he waved his hands around above my head like a spinning tornado. You need to bring it here. And he pointed toward my heart with both hands. He showed me a laminated drawing of the chakra system and pointed to the crown while telling me to eat grounding foods, pray, chant certain words, and move around more. Sounds kind of prescriptive, right? Which is what he told me. In hindsight, looking at it now, um, I would call it, basic guidance for cleansing and grounding. I think at the time, I was looking for an answer. I was looking for someone to tell me what was happening and where it was going and why it took place. I was grateful that it had a positive effect, though. And so his advice and communication was extremely basic, but hard to follow. And yet the effect he had on me was profound. For the next couple weeks after that, I actually calmed down quite a bit. And while all that wind was still blowing inside me, I was able to kind of be a little more human for a little while, which seemed to bring comfort to my son Bailey above all else. Which, honestly, looking back on it, I can imagine how hard it was. As like, I think my son was around, like 14, 15, maybe around that time, and or I think actually, yeah, maybe 13. Anyway, he was in early teenage years at that stage, and we've talked about it a bit now, but I mean, it's weird to watch your parents go through bizarre upheaval in their life. All of us here maybe have seen such things in themselves or others, and so there was certainly a positive effect from this energy healing I received. And so, let's get back to it. We're going to read a little bit further, and then we'll pause for any questions. So feel free, if you have a question, write questions so I will know to prioritize it. A couple weeks later, no more than a month probably, I had a sudden urge to find the woman that had performed that energy blessing on me. I ended up asking around at work and even looked at the vendor list of who was at the outreach fair. I found them immediately. They were called, and this is their real name at the time. I don't think they're called this now. At the time, they were called Oneness University San Diego, or something very close to that. I might have it a little bit off. It turned out they had been followers of this sort of spiritual school in India that honestly seemed kind of like a cult to me. I think it was, and it is. It turned out they had weekly meditations in groups only a few miles from where we lived at the time, and I made a split-second decision to go to one that very night. It was like as soon as I looked at it, as soon as I researched who are these people that did that thing, it was like, oh, that's them? Oh, wow, interesting. I looked at their website and they have a meeting tonight. Oh, wow, how strange. And it's less than 2 miles away from my house. Wow, what an odd wow, maybe I'll just stop by, right? It really was that it was that kind of, we'll say, seemingly seemingly coincidental. But anyway, I made a split-second decision to go to one that very night. It was the first time in my entire life I had actually participated in a group healing meditation. I remember pulling up to some weird activity room in this blown out, trash filled neighborhood park in the Golden Hill area. And I was about to turn around and leave when, of course, I was spotted by an older woman that I had seen at the event where it all started. And this is really what it was. I was like kind of walking away, and some lady was all, "Hello, young man. Hello, young man. Young man. Hello," like calling me out from like way across the field, like, "Hello," like she somehow was trying to get me over there. And she pointed to the room over her shoulder, and it was like I looked at her and I was like, okay. All right. Okay. You know what I mean? Here we go. And so, well, it was too late now. I swallowed whatever fear I had and walked inside to find an entire circle of old people, a little like that movie Cocoon from the 80s. They were all smiling and way too friendly. When it got time to do introductions, I started talking about what was happening to me for one of the first times, and I couldn't stop. Unfortunately, and this was very embarrassing for me, I started to shake and cry and just completely fell apart in that weird, dingy little room. Everything I had experienced over the past couple months just poured out of me in a big sobbing puddle. After entertaining my madness for way too long, the woman who spotted me at the door suddenly put her hand on my knee, just like my grandma had done during that strange experience in July, and my entire body went still. She said something like, "Oh, honey, you're just having an awakening. Congratulations," with this wildly joyful grin on her face. It was it was odd because nobody in that room seemed to have a weird electric cloud around them or any strange jagged energy shooting out of their body. They didn't have like weird beings coming out of their energy field, which I will say, and this is my commentary here, it was definitely calming. It was very like, "Huh, okay, this feels okay." Um, and so it felt like I had been fixated on that energy. I mean, literally every day, and it was one of the few times in which I can let it go. The group meditation process they would participate in involved listening to an audio recording and chanting certain phrases in Sanskrit that were said to go along with the movement of energy within the body. It was one of the first times I had heard about chakras and the energy body. I remember during the meditation, it was like I could see and hear each gateway that we would move through, almost as if each energy center in the body had its own voice that seemed to light up and ring out like a bell inside my body. As we made the sounds, it was like I could actually feel my body rising and flowing with the vibrations. It was all very psychedelic and highly bewildering. I'll pause there to say, I realize now those early experiences with being so, just shockingly activated or having the energy body ripped open, when I look back on it 8 years later, that was very much a training experience. It was like they ripped open my sensitivity and ability to perceive, non physical anatomy by showing me my own through a series of experiences where I got to learn the taste, touch, sight, sound, smell, emotion, feeling, the physiology, even of those pathways within the body. And so it's interesting to look back on that cycle and note that while at the time I thought it was some psychedelic, dissociative, like, whoa, I hallucinated each chakra. And the reality is, here we are 8 years later, and we're using what we learned within those seemingly hallucinatory experiences to help people create real lasting change in their life. So it's like one of those, like, you know what I mean? It was a little bit more than what I realized it was at the same time, but I'll get back to it. After the chanting process, they would take turns performing the very same technique of energy blessing that I had experienced in that first moment at the homeless fair. They told me it was called Diksha and that it literally meant blessing in Sanskrit, which I'm pretty sure is what it means. They explained that most likely what had happened to me was that my crown chakra had been blown open to such an extent that the Kundalini energy and the life force within my body was rapidly expanded. One man equated it to, and this was a weird metaphor. I remember there was this old guy there that was kind of, he was kind of like the weird sort of bitter one, and he equated it to tearing down all the doors and windows and lighting everything on fire at the same time. And I remember going like, "Huh? What?" And he didn't explain why, but I was like, "What? What do you mean? You what, huh?" And I realized what he meant by that was that, in a situation like that, everything comes out. Everything shoots out. Everything comes running out of the doors, evacuating, shooting forth. You know what I mean? Anything hiding, anything, that's living in there it starts blasting out. And that's really what was happening for me. It was like energy was literally blasting through my body like literal wind. And I had no way to describe it. I had no idea what to do with it. And there was a lot more, but I couldn't really grasp it all. And to be honest, it kind of made sense, even though I had no idea what they were talking about. It was the first time I felt okay and accepted in any way since it all began. After that day, I returned every week for over a year. I went to every single meditation and group process of theirs I could find. I would drive all over San Diego, from Oceanside in the north all the way down to San Ysidro at the Mexican border. I even traveled to Arizona for a massive group gathering of Oneness University people from all over the world, and began to experience a type of energy and mystical experiences I had only heard of and seen in movies. At one point, they even published a this was embarrassing, I gotta be real. This was highly embarrassing. At one point, they even published a short article about me in one of their newsletters, talking about this amazing awakening experience one of their youngest members had experienced. That was hard for me. They asked me to write something about it, and someone had taken a short description they had asked me to write about what I had been through, and they published it along with a commentary from one of their quote unquote teachers. It was honestly a bit much for me to take in, but it was one of the only things that made sense in my life after such a strange occurrence. And I'll pause there to say I that was a really weird one. Like somehow, somebody got fascinated by me for a weird moment. I remember they only used like a paragraph of what I had written in there. It was like a newsletter or some kind of like periodic announcement. And I remember looking at it and I was just like, whoa, you know how you instantly get it off your screen and you're like, nope, 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 nope. No, we're not gonna. I would not even engage with it. It was just like, oh God, that's so cringe. you know. And so anyway, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. But it was a bit much for me to take in, but it was one of the only things that made sense at that stage of my life. And, it really did. As weird as it was, it really grounded me and gave me a foundation, at least a fledgling foundation of understanding in some form of spiritual or non-physical energy. And the amount of experiences that I think those people would kind of generate for each other was something so out of this world that I think for a lot of people within our community, it would be too much, honestly. They would do this thing, they would have this form of energy transference, one of the other forms of diksha, where this older couple would sit on these chairs in front of a group, and they had been, so-called highly trained by the people in, the Indian temples, and they would allow some energy to enter their body. This is real. They would allow this energy to enter their body while sitting on these chairs in front of a group of people, and the whole blessing and meditation was literally them smiling in this weird way and just scanning the room. Literally, this is gonna look so weird. Get ready, you guys. It was like this. It was like some of the weirdest shit I'd ever seen in my life. And it was like, this is where it got strange. They would do that for like an hour straight, and somehow they wouldn't blink, and their faces would change. And at times they would laugh. And like at times they would just start babbling and like channeling weird light language. And it was like, and it just, I mean, even as I'm doing it, it looks maniacal, right? You're like, "Whoa, whoa, stop doing that. No, right? Right? Come on, right?" You're like, "Oh God, don't even show us." That's what it was. Um, and I have to admit, I mean, at that stage of my life, it was so new and like I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy." And so I didn't really have time to sit there and go, this "Is this even a good thing?" You know what I mean? It was all so new and so amazing that I was like, "I'll just sit here and take it all in." And what's wild is just this is how bizarre yet highly activated this group was. These people were probably in their late 70s, and they would sit there and, like, scan the room, and they would lock eyes with you, and I swear to you, when they would lock eyes and they would do this with everyone, it was like I would watch their face change. I don't know what they turned into. It was just like the face would disappear, and it was like you would be shown things, and I went all kinds of places and all kinds of scenes. There it was just beyond, like, anything that I had even known to be real at that stage of my life. And what's fun is that it was all totally sober, you know what I mean? There's no drugs whatsoever, you know what I mean? They'd have some, vegetarian snacks afterward and some bland tea, and, and that was it. And very weird, very cool, probably triggering. But it was a very interesting experience. Anyway, let me get back to it. It's not like any of it went away, but it got easier, and just as I was told, something began to flow differently within me. A short time after that first meeting, one of their instructors was holding an initiation workshop for the process of learning to transmit Diksha. It was this 2-day workshop out in Encinitas, California, at some woman's house where they had built these three small structures. Okay, check this out. These three small structures known as sacred chambers in the backyard, which were really just tool sheds with an altar inside and a number of other spiritual items. It was one of the simplest and most straightforward things I had experienced yet, and honestly, a bit anticlimactic. We went through some various contemplations and reflected on our lives in a way that felt kind of diluted to me. But when we began to practice the technique of placing our hands on the head, I realized that something had indeed changed inside me. It was as if I could suddenly pull open or close this strange invisible opening at the tops of people's heads. Suddenly, everyone wanted me to do it to them as well, and I recall feeling kind of ridiculed and resented by a few people there for some reason I didn't quite understand. And I'll pause to comment on that as well. That's really how it happened. I went to a 2-day Diksha, class, and by the end of that one, it was weird because everyone was asking me to do it for them, and at the time, I didn't really understand why, and I was like, "Okay, thanks, guys, you want me to do it?" And I could see people there were like, "What's he doing? What is he doing differently? Who's this guy?" And I was like, I don't it was just like I was just doing what I thought I should do. However, I could literally feel the opening of the crown chakra with my hand, and I did not understand at the time fully that that's actually what was opening. It was just like I could feel this, like, this sort of slow opening occur, and then if I held my kind of breath and kind of like felt into it, I could also kind of like squeeze it back down. And I'm not saying that it was like, "Whoa, that's a miracle, some amazing ability." I was just like, "Whoa, there's this thing that I can feel this thing," and I really had no idea what it is. Mind you, I was still at the stage, I think, at this point where I was really questioning, like, is there a part of me that is still broken and crazy? I mean, this group of people really gave me a foundation of understanding something. That was that I was going through a process. But I have to admit, even within the social group of the people within that cult or group or religious, whatever you want to call it, I did not fit in with them on any level. I mean, I was 38 years old or something like that at the time, and everybody there was probably at the youngest, probably late 50s, absolute youngest. And not to say that's a problem, not to say it's a bad thing, but I mean, I did not fit in there, I didn't fit in there, I didn't fit in there, and even when I came to this, the closest fitting match, I still was like, I was the kid. I was like this little, like, "Oh, look at him, there he goes, you better watch out," type of thing. And it was like, it was a strange experience. At times, maybe a little bit triggering, because I realized, in some ways, people didn't really want to take me seriously. But and so yeah, suddenly everybody wanted me to do it to them as well, and it got a little weird. One day in particular, I stopped by my mom's house after attending one of the Diksha groups, and she was crying, holding her cat Willow, who seemed to be close to death. She was already very old, and it felt like she had a kidney infection, but I'm not sure how I knew that. It was, in fact, one of the first times I had actually received such a clear knowing in that way. We agreed I would try this weird Diksha energy blessing thing I was doing on Willow, and as wild as it sounds, within a few minutes, she seemed to perk up once again. She actually improved significantly for a couple weeks after that, and then suddenly died after being taken to the vet and put on some kind of antibiotic for her kidneys. It was actually true. She was in kidney failure, and somehow I had known. Or was it one of those strange voices I had been listening to? Their volume had started to fade and shift into different parts of me, and I realized that it was easiest to tune into it when I turned my head up and to the left. This was a very important realization that meant more than I could possibly know at that time. The following months led to a series of amazing discoveries, chance encounters, deep wounds resurfacing, and an eventual new state of being that I now understand to be something similar to a walk in, or even what some call a soul unbraiding. For some people, terms like those lead to an instant wave of cognitive dissonance, similar to the mental blockage people have put up against anything that appears to be overly new age. It's still pretty cringeworthy for some, and I wish there were a better set of terms we could use as we watch all these old labels become stagnated and diluted in their overuse. My understanding of the walk-in phenomenon is this: it is a process in which one's energy body opens to such an extent that one piece of them leaves and another walks in. It can be due to trauma, by accident, death of the original self, or even a part of one's soul contract in this life. In some cases, the walk in is in a different version of themselves or another being entirely. It's a hard thing to grasp for those just coming into understanding of the non physical energy, but it is, in my experience, the best description of what happened to me on that day in July 2015. An even more fitting definition for me was also the concept of the soul unbraiding, which had been originally proposed to me by my friend Barbara Buck, who is truly one of the best psychics I have ever known. At that stage of my life, it was the very first time I had heard of such a thing. She explained that the soul braid, or unbraiding process, if you want to call it that, was similar to a walk in, but different from the perspective that the other aspect, being, or energy that walks in is actually a part of an unbraiding, or a splitting apart of two aspects of the self. As the unbraiding process takes place, a person can rapidly shift into a new persona or identity stage in this life. It's not so much that something walked in from outside the body, it's that something was so tightly interwoven with our old self that the process of release and activation seems to turn us into something entirely new. The same goes for true walk ins as well. Each situation is marked by its own unique individualities, but one thing we invariably observe is that in a very short time, sometimes instantly, sometimes over a series of months, the person undergoes a rapid and fundamental change of who and what they are in this world. In the several years that have passed since my initial experiences, I have learned to interpret this part of my story in very new ways, constantly updating and revisiting or revising, excuse me, my understanding as new information comes in. I think that's one of the best things we can do as awakened or, quote unquote, activated beings. We must learn to look critically at our ideas about what we believe is real and become totally comfortable with throwing it all out at times in favor of deeper truth. Since that time, I have had the occasion of meeting many varying examples of the walk in or soul unbraiding process within many people in my community. Each one is completely different. If there's one thing we know, it's that we are all figuring it out together, whether it be a walk in, soul unbraiding, or maybe just a profound personal shift. Whatever it is, those who have experienced it will inevitably go through such a massive change that in a very short time, they may be nearly unrecognizable from a previous version of themselves present only days or weeks earlier. It really didn't matter which label I chose to apply to myself. Every single person in my life could tell something was changing at a shocking pace. Within 3 months of the original crown chakra opening experience, I had been successful in shedding a series of medications I had been taking for around 8 years at that point. I somehow lost around 35 pounds during that time and even felt guided to do strange things like write my name differently, speak differently. I even tried writing with my right hand for a brief time. Some of it stuck, and some of it was a series of symbolic gestures I felt I needed to go through, thinking it was part of me learning to be something new. It's still funny because in the midst of all that, I still had no idea I had a psychic ability or anything other than a freak occurrence in my life. I mean, there were signs, but I had never seen the real version of it. So everything felt so vague and unknowable, despite all the activity going on inside me. We'll pause there for the moment. We're about an hour and 20 minutes in, and we're going to look at your questions. I know I've been reading for a while. Thanks for hanging out with us, you guys. You never know who's going to stick around for such wildness, but I appreciate it. Let's see. First question I see is from Willow Roots. Question: is the walk in a positive thing, or could it be a lower vibrational thing? That's a very smart question. I can tell you that so far, what I've seen, like through my personal experience and the people that I've worked with, I think for most people it's been a positive experience. But well, I'm gonna be real. I have seen what I would call a very fractured version of it. So it's not a thing that I would say necessarily has to go right or wrong or good or evil. But I do think it's possible that, or we'll say it's certainly within the realm of possibility that something not so good can enter the body. I think we have situations like that on Earth with people that are, in what we might call the elitist controlling factions, where they've given over their personal autonomy to some other type of being or energy, because when you look at the definition of even, possession, you know what I mean? It's like, and you hold that up next to something like a walk in definition or even a soul inbreeding, it's like, wait a minute, hold on. You know what I mean? There's a few. There's a few strange, similarities. So, I think yes. To answer your question, yes, I believe it's possible. It could be something lower. I think that's one of the kickers of living on Earth in a third to fourth density society is there's an equal amount of good and bad, right and wrong, dark and light, and for everything holy and sound and wonderful that we encounter, it's nearly guaranteed that we're living in a world in which we get to also, if we choose, experience the polar opposite of that. I think that's the balance of living in a realm of duality. But I mean, maybe maybe that's just my opinion. Anyway, I'm gonna look for anything that says question. Thank you, Kat L. What's going on? Thanks for hanging out. Say more, if you would, about the importance of turning your head up and to the left. Yes, I absolutely can. I believe in what I have observed within myself and those I have worked with, and also people that I see, say on like shows on YouTube, and we could even say people on TV. For a lot of people, when we're tuning into or focusing on, or even just choosing to connect with spirit or non physical energy in some form or another, we tend to have what we would call like access points within the auric field. Now, some of those are natural. You could think of them like openings or portals within an overall structure. Some of them are worn over time, openings that we create. Some of them are caused through wounds or traumas. And sometimes we're just even, what we call like genetic, we're just born with it. But I do believe in what I've seen is that, for myself, or is that I notice that whenever I will connect in a reading or doing work with other people, or even in lives like this where we're sort of working in some form, with non-physical energy, I always go this way. Boom. It's like left and up. Sometimes really far up and to the left, but I've just noticed that we have these access points, and for me, that's the direction that I turn, almost as if, there's someone or something that comes into that place to speak. Now, it's weird because I've encountered other people in sessions where I've worked with their energy and their access point is to my right or up or down or in a different place. And sometimes it's like right in front of us and I kind of turn my head in a weird way. But I would really, for those that are coming into awareness of your intuitive abilities, notice what direction you get pulled when you're, let's say, in a meditation or you're in a spiritual process and you're attempting to communicate with, or more importantly, understand a spiritual message. We'll call it a spiritual message for lack of a more better term. And what you might find is that you have a natural tendency to maybe turn this way or that way or up or down or whatever it may be. And it's just because what I've noticed is those are access points. Now, I think they're referenced loosely in the Law of One as an example, and from the perspective that people would hear frequencies, in one ear, right or left. And one of the areas that I don't necessarily agree with within the Law of One was that they had stated that most likely those who would hear that frequency to the left, that was, the dark side, and the right is the good side. And I can say with great assurance that at least from my experience, that dynamic is irrelevant. Darkness, shadow elements, they don't care about, you know what I mean? There's no position. They don't go like, "Oh, okay, well, here we are. I'm gonna speak to him from his left, so he takes me more seriously." It's not really like that. However, you may notice that certain messages do tend to come in from different directions, and every now and then, that can have something to do with the quality of a person's auric field, which is a very real, very powerful thing. It's what I would call like the first line of defense in terms of just people's energy. It's also like you're kind of like the part of you that connects with other people before you connect with them. So you know what I mean? It's very, very active. But and so I wouldn't say it's important to turn to the left. I would say if you're a person that's devoting themselves to unpacking and understanding the ways in which spirit works in your life, you may find yourself getting pulled in a direction. If you do, allow yourself to lean into that direction and treat it like you're kind of going, "Hey, I'm just wondering if you can," you know what I mean? Like you're having a conversation with someone next to you. And I think if you do it with good intentions, it'll sort of develop. It's almost like a relationship begins in a weird way. Anyway, here's another question. I hope that makes sense, Cat L. Joanna LeBlanc says, question, what tarot card do you think represents a walk-in, soul braiding, etc.? Whoa, that's a smart question. Um, I'm gonna go with the star, but not because the star is like what I would call a automatic representation of that. I don't think that was like one of the intentions specifically of the meanings for the star card. I think that it denotes things that are destined to take place in one's life. And because the energy that comes along with the star is often what we would call, well, I mean, it is. It's one of the only signs, it's one of the only representations in the world of multidimensional tarot of actual multidimensionality. I would say there's a few of them, but the star is the one that is definitely from out of this world just by its very nature. And so to me, the star could be a walk-in card, but I don't know that there would be one specific card that would denote that process. Um, I think it could point us in certain directions. Let's see, what's another transformational card? Judgment. Although judgment in and of itself would not necessarily denote solely the walk-in experience, but what happens in a judgment cycle, we go through an ego death, a version of us leaves and another version of, you know what I mean? So it's like, that sort of fits. Um, we could even use that in some cases for the magician. We could say the magician could bring that type of an experience into your life. And so, anyway, I think I'm like running too far with your question. But, um, anyway, thank you. Let's see if there's any more. Well, keep going. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, it is. It's so hard to see comments with this. It's kind of easier to see some things, but then without it, it's like it's weird. Anyway, I'm at the stage where I'm learning to get used to myself without glasses. It's bizarre. But anyway, we will keep going. Let me know if there's any other questions. I think we're gonna close the reading portion for today because we're already at about half an hour. So we're gonna take questions and comments for a short time. Then the good news is we'll be back next week to continue this exciting journey. But I'm gonna scan for questions and then we're gonna look at your comments. What's up, Raga Cats? For a second, I was gonna call you MAGA Cats. I'm sorry. Depending on your current position, you would either be offended or joyous at that. But for a second, it looked like MAGA Cats. Question: what are the hooded beings? Positive, negative, purpose? That's just also a very, very smart question. I can only be really authentically honest with that. I do not know. I don't know. It was an aspect of my story and early experience that still remains unexplained. And there may come an explanation for it, there may come a revealing for it. The feeling that I get is that probably not. Probably not. When I feel into it though, it feels as though they were guides. They were beings. They were what some may call watchers. They may have been part of an infrastructure or a organization or a body or a collective of beings that kind of oversee such processes. I know that in the years since having those experiences, I've come across many forms of sentient life in the non physical realms. And if there's one thing I can tell you, it is absolutely 100% realistic and possible that there are countless groups of beings that are attracted to and play very important roles in assisting and observing and just watching, yeah, observing the process of humans going through such types of activation. To me, I would say it's a true example of what we would call a fourth density being, in that they have an ability to look at the entirety of your life experience rather than through the experience demonstrated in one static moment. And so when I feel into their presence, I think they're just part of that non-physical realm. And I didn't feel like fear. I did not feel evil. I did not feel like punishment. There was none of those, but there was also not goodness. There was also not holy, like I love you type things. It was not a situation that I think even required such things. I mean, it was literally me waking up in the middle of the night and looking to my left and going, just sitting there like, fuck. And then looking, and then boom, there's my grandma right next to me, and I'm just like, and you start crying, and it's like, what the boom, 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 and like all these scenes just unfold, and then it was like next morning, boom, there we go, waking up. It was a it's a bewildering thing. If there's one thing I can tell you, because someone just asked a question about a tarot card, in the realm of tarot, we would call that a I would call it a 8 of swords, confusion, like, you're just like, "What?" You don't know which way to go. Anyway, thank you. That's a smart question. We'll look for a couple others if there are any. Ragged Cat says, "Maybe you're looking to your left because 'cause you're facing the client and you're accessing their right side." It's possible. It's possible there may be a totally, normal human explanation. Might just be nothing at all. Thank you, Sally Forth, for hanging out with us. This is wild, dude. I appreciate you. Let me know if you guys have any more questions. Willow Root says, I had that ringing in my left ear a few minutes ago. Congratulations. She says, question, do you think there are people and entities that initiate or say, there we go. I think I was just saying this, right? I realize I'm behind in the comments. Do you think there are people and entities that initiate or sense awakenings and feed off the energy or try to ride the wave? Yes, absolutely. In both good and bad ways. I'm grateful that I think I got to experience the good versions of it at that stage later on. I have experienced some very negative versions of just energies or beings that I think really get a kick out of observing us, which we will talk about later. But yeah, very much. It's a very real thing. As far as I'm concerned, it's real. Anyway, thanks you guys. Yeah, Joanna LeBlanc said, yeah, the magician would do that to you. The magician's the choice version of it that takes place over a period of time, which is why I would say is somewhat different from a sudden walk-in experience, because the magician will change everything for you. It will assist you in transforming. It's often what I would call a harbinger of transformation. But I would say one difference with the magician is that it's always a choice. The magician will sort of dangle something in front of you in a metaphorical way in your life, and you'll go, could I, should I, will I, can I? It's like this, I don't even think it's real. You know what I mean? And then you'll go down this road of self discovery and activation. And I would say in some ways that that could also fit in, you know what I mean? But it's a weird thing. I think there are certain questions I think that lend themselves better to slightly different forms of energetic analysis. And I would say that that might be one of the inherent, what's the word? I'll use a different word. Vagaries. One of the inherent vagaries of tarot. Anyway, somebody out there will get what I'm saying. Aurora Diamond Heart says MAGA cats. Yeah, right. I don't know. Would that be a good one? Would it? I don't know. I don't know. I'm getting I'm getting simultaneously concerned and somewhat like disgusted by that movement. Not entirely. It's just it's so distorted. Anyway, LVC 7313 says, question: are you working on book 2 yet? Um, Technically, oh god, I've been working on book like 1, 2, 3, and 4 in fragments for like years. But book 2 is about tarot, specifically. It is a tarot book. And so I can honestly say I've been working on that one since 2019, which sometimes makes it worse when you got to put everything together because it's like there's so much to draw from. That really is my problem, you guys. I have a whole Google Drive full of like presentations from classes that I've never done and slideshows that I've never used and like so much stuff. I'll say it publicly. I'm grateful to the version of myself from 2019 to 2021 that was obsessed with creating those things. I didn't know why at the time. Didn't know why. Felt like nobody cared. Not saying they do now, but you know what I mean? It was, yeah. Missing Time says, might look into bifocals. I don't think I can. I don't think I can. I tried to do a version of contacts that do that, and it was a train wreck. And then I did like this other version of the or what was I forget what they call it, where they give you one eye that's your prescription and one eye that's not, and it somehow balances out in your vision and makes things normal. Did not work for me. Um, but I actually have noticed visual improvements from use of dimethyl sulfoxide. And so we're not, I don't know if that's a prohibited thing. So I'm just letting you guys know that's part of the book that I'm writing. It's a character, but yeah, you can help regenerate eyes in some form or another. And I have actually noticed that my close-up vision has gotten easier, but the distance is very poor. Like I can focus really well right up close, but like right about there. So I have maybe like 18 inches of space and then I go into blind mode, which kind of sucks. But if you're a microscopic object, I can like I can like focus in super tight on it, which I couldn't do earlier this year. And I can tell you why, you guys, for real. That got really fuzzy and weird for me. And this is a fact. This is a literal reality. If you have high liver toxicity, your eyesight will begin to degrade. This is a living truth. And I got to experience a high level of liver toxicity in 2025. And I'm very grateful to say I have also got to experience the great lessening of that toxicity. And I noticed that when things started to improve, I was like, whoa, I can sort of, things got a little bit sharper, which I've heard people talk about. And, in the world of traditional Chinese medicine, they say the liver rules the eyes. So It's literally true. It's literally true. Prophesize boy says, "Just go to a hypnotherapist," or something like that. I am. That's that is a previous role that I have played. Yeah. Mary says, "My access point is up and to the right. I also close my eyes to access my psychic screen and to receive messages." Absolutely. I think that's very, very reliable, and I know that you've done enough work to kind of analyze and feel into how that works for you. That's a very important one, what you call the psychic screen, or the willingness to sort of, allow something to form and be present within that internal visual space without any sort of stimulus or any sort of, tool. It's just like boom, we close our eyes and open the screen, and however your process is, I'm sure it's different, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Joanna says, question, sorry, this might be a loaded question, but what in general are the Watchers? I've heard this term a lot and some explanations. They're referred to in many different forms. I know there's a lot of folklore about it. I know there's like official stories about like God, I can't even remember it at this stage. Oh my God, this is how out of touch, I am with like spiritual folklore and all that stuff. I can only tell you my understanding. I believe that there is a wide variety of beings and energies and forms of life whose literal duty and purpose is to just observe and watch, to catalog, to be present, and to see the journey of human consciousness. And to me, when I feel into that, those are ancient forms of life that have existed on our planet who have taken up that role in somewhat of an archetypal sense. And then I think there's also a host of what we would call like other beings, non physical energies that also exist as just sort of watchers and observers. Some of them will tamper, some of them will help, some of them will assist, some of them will create great damage and mislead us. But I think when I refer to what I would call my understanding of Watcher's energy, that it refers to just so many different things, which are not all good. Trust me, not all good. And so someone else out there is going to give you a much better answer that might make more sense to you. And I would say only believe it if they have more followers and their videos get more hits than this one. That's how you'll know. Right. Right? That's how you'll know they're telling the truth, right? In the world of YouTube, ladies and gentlemen, that's still a standard of authenticity. Well, more people agree, more people watch that one, not that one. So, anyway, I'm going in a needless direction. Going in a needless direction. Nothing to find. 909 says, question, are you really good at not holding resentments and grievances about the past? What I've noticed about myself is that I am the type of a person who can have a really big argument with someone today, and tomorrow, if we're actually friends, we'll be like, "Hey, what's up? You want to hang out?" You know what I mean? I've had lots of those experiences. I think that um that's just kind of like part of my makeup. I don't know that that means that I hold on to things or I don't hold on to them. I can tell you that I don't have a huge list of people in my head that I'm like, I hate him because of this, and I hate so and so because of that, and I'm going to get back at this guy because of this. But I do have, groups of people that I feel things about, and we could say that, like any of us, we will harbor pieces of resentments at times. Sometimes we'll hold on to certain grievances. I really reserve the right to allow myself to experience whether the immediate letting go or it be the holding on to of those things. I think that in each case, it'll be teaching us something, and the difference between a person that allows it to overtake them and a person that might not, I think, comes from allowing yourself to experience and understand and really feel like those things, whether they be resentments or grievances about the past, and like literally sit there and not avoid it and go, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to bring up this person's face in my head. And like, what do I really feel? What do I really, really, really feel about it? I think that's a very potent form of shadow work. And I think it's one of the things that, especially for those of us that have liver energy, because that, people that have resentful energy, in some cases will be holding a lot of liver energy. The correlation goes either direction. It can be caused by one or it can be a byproduct of the other. But um, I've noticed that it does not seem to be as much of a factor for me at this stage of the journey. So maybe we could say we've gotten better at that. I don't know. Maybe not. If you hang out with me on Facebook long enough, I will inevitably tell people to fuck off or get in an argument with people. But I think the difference is I don't think about them later. So it's like, does that mean we hold on to it? Good question. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. That's a very smart line of questioning there. Ramy Salem says, Matt, can you still open the crown chakra for people? Yes, absolutely. We do it all the time. We do it in every session that I work with individuals. Absolutely, positively. We teach other people how to do it. It's something that you and everyone else that's watching the show, past, present, or future, can do. Although I don't know how they'd watch this in the past, right? But anyway, yeah, no, we absolutely, as humans, have the ability to train and enhance and integrate the ability to work with non-physical energy. And if you're one of the people that's hanging out here today watching this, believe it or not, it's probably a factor for you in some way. No one comes to a random YouTube channel like this by mistake. You know what I mean? You didn't just stumble in here, although maybe it seems like you did. Some people won't agree, but anyway. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom of the chat because we're going to roll out of here in a little bit, you guys, so we can stay relevant on the YouTube algorithm. Anyway, thanks, Nothing Defined. That's amazing that you're such a sensitive but not easily hurt or holding on to hurts. Once again, I'm not trying to say that I'm a good version of that because I could, you know what I'm telling you? It's like, there's a few people out there. I can think of a couple of them where I'm like, you fucking, you know what I mean? Isn't that normal though? Isn't that part of the human experience? I think it's another thing when you're ruled by it, right? Right? When it becomes like your mode of operation in the world, then it's like that's a whole other story. But anyway, I'm not an example of a perfectly peaceful, like, oh, it's okay, it's all good, live and let live. Because there's times where I'm like, hell no, you should punch that motherfucker in the face as hard as you possibly can. Like you know what I mean? There's a time and place for that in this life as well. But anyway, I will stop there because, the YouTube algorithm doesn't like such talk, as we all know. Anyway, I'm going to scan for any more questions before we roll out of here. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I want to thank everybody who has recently purchased our book. It's weird. It's not like it's selling thousands of copies, but I'm shocked that people still buy it even to this day with literally no promotion. Other than this is it. This is the only promotion that we have. But yeah. Anyway, Renee Nagel says we were given emotions to experience all of them, so we don't stuff them into our energy fields and cause disturbance in our bodies. Absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Absolutely correct. Treat emotioners. Treat emotions as visitors that are just passing through. There we go. That's what we're trying to say. Anyway, let's see if there's any other questions. What's up, Rob? How's it going? Thanks for rolling through. Mufon. Oh man, Mufon Fred died today. Okay, we will pause for a moment to discuss that. And I want to say, first off, rest in peace to Mufon Fred. I did spend a little bit of time in Mufon in the early days. So we'll thank Fred for his contribution. We'll also thank James Rink for his contribution to our lives. For those that are not aware, which, some people that watch this channel will be familiar with James Rink and Super Soldier Talk, and others won't be. And that's fine. But we also send our love very, very sincerely Love and healing to the families, and big respect to James and Fred on that journey into another timeline or another world. And um, I'll probably comment on it more on a different live stream. You know what I mean? Today's about a book reading. There's other things I can talk about, but it will dilute the energy of the moment. But anyway, it's definitely one of those times in which a lot of people are leaving the planet. It makes us wonder. Sometimes I wonder. Let's open a weird can of worms before we run out the door. Sometimes I wonder if maybe that was one of the purposes of Three Eye Atlas. You know what I mean? It brought change. Maybe it had to pick up a few souls. I'm speaking somewhat facetiously, and I'm also speaking in possibly a serious tone as well, because what if? What if? What if that was actually a thing? We live in a world in which such things are possible. Andromedan says, I might be next. Really? Oh, man. Well, I hope it's not you, my friend. But if it is, my respects. But it better not be. Yeah. Yeah. What are you doing? Your ass belongs here on Earth, sir. Anyway, I feel you, though. It certainly feels like that at times, right? Certainly feels like that. White Swan says, 2 deaths in my family last week. I'm sorry to hear that. This is certainly the time period, right? We all will experience such things, and we'll watch these exits occur in on mass at times. It's a very real thing. Highly likely. I actually read that White Swan as right. You're likely high, Matthew, and I was like, what? What? Actually, I'm not. Maybe I will be, but not actually yet. For once, you know what I mean. But I'm like, what? But anyway, I'm just joking. I get it, but it is honestly, it's really sad. And I'm also one of those people that is a big believer in that. You know what I mean? When things get weird, I tend to get humor. H- I will pull humor out of it. I think that's part of one of my coping mechanisms. I'm like, I mean, it is really. It's like a saying that I used to say to myself at a previous stage of the journey, which we were kind of referring to at the beginning of our live stream, another time in which I was going through lots of addictions. And it was one of those things where I used to say, if you can't laugh at it, you can't live with it. You know what I mean? And it's like just that process of making every difficult thing in your life some form of a humorous joke. I'm not saying it's the best approach. Not saying it's the best approach. I'm just saying that was that was one of the ones that I think it kinda helped me. I think it helped me, more than I realized, but anyway, totally. A lot of people are losing people right now. I'm sorry to hear that, Robin Lane, 2 younger cousins in November. Wow. Willow Root says, "Death is only a dream." You know it. You know it. But I guess we still have to go through it as a 3D being, right? So it's like we can all go, "Oh, yeah, it's just a dream, right? Oh, yeah, it's no big deal. Oh, yeah, we just go to, the body is dead, but the spirit lives on." It's so easy to say that, and then it's like, "Oh, but me? No, no, I don't wanna die." You know what I mean? It's like we still have the primal fear of such an occurrence. To me, that's absolutely, absolutely normal human nature. I think it's healthy. If you don't have a healthy fear or avoidance of death, or at least this weird can of worms that unpacks inside you of all kinds of emotions and feelings and confusions, if you don't have something like that in your world, every time you really ponder such a thing, it's like, how in touch are you with your heart and with your emotional body? Because it's like I feel like we're meant to. Our life is meant to be one of examining and feeling and experiencing such things. And anyway, we're getting way too philosophical at the end here. We're just about at 2 hours. So if you got any final questions, bring them in. I do want to let you know, though, we will be back next week. We're going to be back every Wednesday until we get through this lengthy tome. We'll call it a lengthy tome because it's 444 pages. So in the midst of that, I will do a couple other lives for readings. I've had some requests from people recently. Just so you know, guys, I don't really check Facebook Messenger, but somebody recently asked me, when are you going to do a live stream and readings again? Um, and so we will do them again quite soon. But um, anyway, let me see if there's any final questions or comments before we roll out the door. Willow Root says, my fear is more how I die and will it be painful? I think we are rightful to be afraid or concerned of such things, right? Our last moments on this earth, there's a lot of emotion behind that. I think of James in his last moments on this earth, and I wonder if he knew that was a thing that was coming for him. And yet, I will also make one statement before we go, which I probably shouldn't make it, but you guys, whenever someone dies, there is a buffer period that occurs. And it's not like some mandatory time period where, they're unreachable, but there is a death process that has to take place. And in many cases, there's a period of time that must pass before a person's soul based interactive energy is available on the earth plane for such things as channeling or interfacing or connecting with their spirit. Now, for those of you guys out there that are learning to open up and connect with your intuitive abilities, one of the ways you're always going to know a fake, bullshit, clout chasing channeler is because the second a famous person dies, they're going to start channeling them. And so pay attention over the next few days and weeks. If you're part of the group of people that's within the secret space program disclosure starseed community, be very wary of those that claim to be channeling people like James Rink. You know what I mean? Because if there's one thing that I stand firm on, is that there is a period of adjustment and change that occurs. There's experiences that we go through on the other side. And unless a person is still trapped on the physical earth plane in some forth as a disembodied spirit, you're not going to be hearing from them. You're not going to be connecting with them. It doesn't mean you can't interface and feel the energy and add words to it. But if someone out there is telling you that they're channeling somebody and they literally died, like they did with Charlie Kirk, like 12 hours after he died, people were posting, I'm channeling him right now. And it's like, no, you're not. You are not. And so I'm just saying that to anyone out there that digests the content that we all view. That's how you're going to know. It's going to be one of the signs. Those are clout chasers. They're fakers. They're toxic people. They want hits. In many cases, they're well-meaning in what they do, but they are not for real. And I don't care who it is. I don't care who your favorite channeler is, who you subscribe to. If they were channeling this guy within 24 hours of his death, I would turn it off and move on and highly question the integrity of people that choose to do that. And yet, there's almost no one else in our community that's going to make a statement like I'm making. So we tacked it on to the end of this video. So only like 2 or 3 people in the world who actually watch the end of this will get to hear it. But I'll comment on it again in the future. But yeah. Renee says there's all kinds of processes people go through when they make their transition, and all that takes time. It absolutely 100% does. Absolutely. Definitely does. And then you know what's crazy? I could also be completely wrong. That's the wildest part about the current, kind of spiritual multidimensional climate that we're existing in is that, because we agreed to live in a time on earth in which everyone gets to have their own sort of individualistic timeline, we also get to live with the idea that what's impossible to one person will actually be possible to another. So it's like, when you really, really have to look at the nature of multidimensionality, you could say that's both equally true and untrue at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a crazy thing. But anyway, be mindful of those spiritual performers and clout chasers. You will notice, like in the end, they're not going to be able to tell you anything that you didn't already know. or they'll spin off and make weird claims that don't really fit in with the overall kind of message of the person that you came to be familiar with. There'll be fragments of another person's consciousness that a piece of them calls forth to describe or give words to what they believe they're experiencing in that internal place. It doesn't mean they're not experiencing something. It's just it's a very murky road. And so anyway, I want to thank everybody for hanging out here today for both of our book reading and also the angular and sharp opinions that we throw around afterward. But anyway, please do click the subscribe button if you're into this. You can greatly aid me by hitting the like button. If you're watching this later on, leave a question or a comment, because I have a plan to create some more videos as we come into the new year. We have a little bit of a path being laid out in front of us. So your interaction is more critical now than ever before. But I love you guys. Thanks for being a part of my strange movie in this physical world. And we'll be back in exactly 1 week. In the meantime, stay out of trouble out there.